Welcome back to the channel. In this video, Aron Ra challenges a theist to provide actual evidence for God, instead of passing the burden of proof to atheists. The debate quickly turns into a heated clash over Hitchens Razor, circular reasoning, conflicting religions, and whether philosophical arguments can count as evidence. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it.
To say something is true does not mean that it is true. It also does not mean that I have to prove it false. It means that the burden of proof is still on you to show the truth of your claim. And if you can't, then we go back to Hitchens Razor, where what is asserted without evidence may be dismissed without evidence. But as I said, it's not just that you don't have any evidence for God, for the supernatural, for anything, for Christianity in particular. It's not just that you lack all of these things. It's that I have evidence against a lot of these specific claims, and especially against, scripture and various interpretations of the supernatural. You have to be able to show some substance. So I have facts and evidence against supernatural claims, and you have nothing to support supernatural claims.
All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let PP repeat his question just because I did have it on mute just when you started to answer it. So I'm going to let you tell our audience what your question was and then let you ask another question. So go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, quickly, my question was, how does the, how does the presence of conflicting mythos and the development and progression of various mythos undermine the concept of a God simpliciter, or in general? For example, a deistic God, how does any of this mythos or perhaps contradictions in this mythos or relations to it have any relevance to the non-existence of God simpliciter, which atheism would have to provide?
All right, 15 seconds to ask that next question.
Okay, well, atheism doesn't have to provide.
You've already
that,
answered it.
You've already answered
it
anyway.
Yeah. You've already tried to answer. Okay.
I said I'd be happy to answer it. I don't have to answer, but I can, and I already have, but I will repeat or paraphrase if you like.
I'm okay.
So the fact that we're not talking about polytheism, the fact that we're not talking about henotheism, we're not talking about multiple different gods that exist in different parts of the world, and that all may be deceptive. We're talking about a concept of a God that is one God that is supposed to be truthful. Now, it's given many different versions in all these different religions, and they're all violently conflicting with each other. And as I noted when I was 8 years old, I pointed out, have you noticed that the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims are all based on the same God, and yet they've been at war with each other each since their inception, which implies a fundamental communication error. And they're all claiming absolute truth, even when they all differ from each other, to the point that you have got thousands of different denominations within each religion, so that it becomes absurd, especially with the way that we'll kill each other over any slight discrepancy. And there's no way to show any truth of it. That's it. And that's why it all comes down to authoritarian dictates. It's what some guy tells you to believe. You have to believe exactly what he said because he said so, and not for any other reason. Without question, reservation, or reason, you believe what you're told because the authority told you to. And if you deviate from that, well, then heresy, blasphemy, and apostasy are all capital crimes where at different points of history you could be murdered because you didn't believe what you were told to believe exactly the way you were told to believe it. And all of this are facts and evidence against the truth of the God claim. God does not ever intercede. He doesn't do anything.
Right, 10 seconds.
It's always people trying to represent God whenever. Have you ever noticed that God can create planets and viruses and everything that humans can't make, but he can't make anything humans can make? He can't make a box or a boat or a book or a building because he needs us to do his work for him because it's a scam.
I don't want to cut you off there, Aaron. Just we're doing cross-examination, so I don't want to cut you off right in the middle of a good thought, but we're going to give 15 seconds over to PP to ask another question, and then we'll give you up to a minute to answer the question. And we're going to do that. I think we'll do up to 5 questions here, so let's make them good ones.
Okay, right. So you didn't answer that question, but that's fine. Look, okay, you did. Okay.
Directly.
No,
just 1 second there. I don't want to place anybody on mute. Just let him ask his question there.
Okay. So,
well, don't have him tell me that I didn't answer when I did. I did directly answer the question.
Right. Okay. So you say that you can prove that God doesn't exist, or that any God doesn't exist, given that you are an atheist, which means without God.
I never said any such thing.
So you don't believe that you can. So do you believe that?
No, I never said any such thing. I'm tired of you misrepresenting my. Why do Christians or theists in general always misrepresent the atheist position?
Do you believe that
every religious argument? Have you noticed it's just based on another false assumption?
Just one second there, Aaron. We gotta let him ask his question.
Do you believe that God, in any form, doesn't exist?
And his question was that he misrepresented me again, because every religious argument is always a false assertion. It's always a false assumption. It's never based on actual factual data. It's always a misperception some way. So he says that I think that I can prove God, despite the fact that I've said that it is logically impossible to prove something like a God, because a God has, if it were true, that it would have infinite magic powers to keep itself hidden. Logically there, you couldn't disprove such a thing. But then likewise, you can't prove that Godzilla doesn't exist, and neither does that mean that Godzilla does exist, which is often the argument. If you can't prove that it doesn't exist, then somehow it means that it does. Shut up.
All right, back to you, perspective.
I mean, I don't know why you think you can't disprove the existence of a God. For example, it could be logical contradiction.
I did just explain why. Do I need to go back over that for you?
No, you said no. I get that. What you're saying is that essentially you're making an argument, essentially, of divine hiddenness, that an omnipotent being could hide itself. I mean, you just make an argument that an omnipotent being couldn't exist, right? So that you just have to show that there is a logical contradiction within the existence of that being. So, and you can absolutely prove a negative.
So would you like something?
So I'm just wondering. So I'm just wondering. What is your proof for the proposition God does not exist?
Already stated, and now will be repeated. In order to, science is all about what is supported and what is not supported. So empty, unsupported assertions have zero credence, just like claims that have been proven false. So when you assert something and you cannot show the truth of it, then Hitchens Razor applies. You've made an empty assertion. I don't have to give it credit. I don't have to prove it wrong. Lincoln's maxim, Hitchens Razor, they both apply to this. So I have to have you present the justification for your empty-ass assertion that you just made up. I don't have to prove it wrong. It's not incumbent upon me. You have to show the truth of the statement you made. It's one thing to say that you believe something. You can believe anything you want to, and nobody's even going to challenge you on it. You don't have to defend it as long as you admit that it is just a belief. But once you state that it is a fact, well, now you have to show that it is a fact. Now the burden of proof is on you.
Well, one, you do absolutely have to defend a belief, because a belief is to affirm something is true. But that's separate to the point.
Two more questions.
The point that I'm making here is that my proposition, which I have to defend, which I've defended with the principle of sufficient reason, is that God does exist. The proposition you have to defend is that a God doesn't exist. Now, you're saying that, no, you said, I am rejecting it, Hitchens Razor, you're rejecting my proposition, which I don't think was sufficient.
Because you didn't provide any evidence.
That's your argument. That's your argument.
The debate is
the argument for the argument from sufficient reason, but that's irrelevant. That's my argument, and that would be why my argument was wrong, fallacious, whatever. If it is, your argument would be to defend a God does not exist.
Right, so which I did.
You attacked my argument. Make an argument,
and I didn't just do that.
No, you said it was impossible to do that.
Right. So I'm wondering how you said. I also gave reasons why we know that the God of the Bible is, if we're talking about the Bible God, that one definitely doesn't exist, because we know that all these books, all these stories in the Bible are definitely not true.
Even if
claims of the soul, we know that there is
Christianity,
we know that there is no soul.
So we're going to let him
we have facts and evidence against the soul as well. So I did provide all of these, and you're pretending now that I didn't, while you are also pretending that you presented evidence which you did not.
Okay. So, right, I'm going to say this, right? There is arguments against Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever religion specifically that you may like, whatever, they would be specific arguments against propositions which affirm their truth.
Okay.
I'm asking you to provide evidence for the proposition that you're affirming, which is that God does not exist.
And
which means that you have to show that it is either. Just to be clear, that means you have to show that it is either logically incoherent, empirically impossible, or transcendentally impossible. So I'm just wondering how you are going to do that.
Yeah, well, I did start. I gave a short list, but you didn't understand any of those. So let me just continue on because it's a very long list. If you'd like a logical argument, then when we say that God exists outside of this reality, well, then that's fine. That just logically means he does not exist in reality. That's one way we could argue for it. I did already tell you that we have a bunch of empty assertions which have all proven to be false, and that's a problem. When you're claiming for evidence and you don't actually have a single fact in evidence, that's a problem, especially when you want to argue, is there more facts in evidence for Christianity than there is for not Christianity, right? So you haven't presented any, there's not one thing that we can both verify to be true and is also supportive of your position. But I did list a whole bunch of things that you ignored, that you denied, but I did list a whole bunch of things that are contradicting your claim. It's not just the lack of evidence for your position, it's the evidence against your position. Any trial that we make on psychic phenomenon, anything we do about exorcists or NDEs even, those things collapse even, and faith healers and all of that, everything comes up butt kiss. That's it. And then we have the claims of Scripture, for example, all of which have been proven to be wrong. All of it fails. We have lots of facts and evidence against your various claims. Where did you ever come up with any, give me a fact in evidence supporting your position?
Okay, so you did actually mention one thing there, which I can say is an argument, at least against a conception of God, which is God could not exist outside of reality. So I'm assuming that's because you're saying reality is existence. So you're saying God, it would form a contradiction. God can't exist outside of existence. But that wouldn't resolve whether God is existence, so like a pantheistic view, or a panentheistic view, which I would actually assert, or whether God exists within existence itself. Maybe God is nature.
The problem you have is that you've encumbered
you would
yourself
still have the same. You would still have the same problem.
Okay, well, actually, you still have the same problem.
Also, I'd like to quickly say that when we consider proving a negative, it's not enough to give arguments against the evidence for the positive. So,
right.
For example,
That's
if I was to say,
for
example, if I was to say it's raining outside, and you were to say, actually, Lewis, the way in which you've said it's raining outside is wrong because you've relied upon, let's say, a reflection in a window, or you've relied upon a video camera footage, or whatever, and you show the issues with the way I'm collecting data. You show why my evidence might not be correct. It doesn't prove that it's not raining outside. It proves that what it would do is call into question my evidence for my proposition, but that wouldn't prove the negative proposition. I'm asking you to prove the negative proposition.
Right.
So what proof do you have for the non-existence of God?
The theist keeps asking the same question because he still won't accept who has to prove what. Aron never claimed he searched all of reality and ruled out every possible God. He's saying the claim hasn't earned belief. That's a much narrower position. Rejecting an unsupported claim doesn't create a new claim that needs equal proof. If someone says an invisible dragon lives in the basement, the listener doesn't inherit the job of disproving every dragon anyone could invent. The person making the claim has to show why it deserves belief. The theist keeps trying to turn atheism into a rival religion with its own doctrine, evidence, and absolute claim. That makes the debate look balanced when it isn't. One side says a God exists. The other side says the case hasn't been made. Aron doesn't need a supernatural replacement for God. He only needs to show that the argument on the table hasn't met its burden.
Well, I didn't realize that we were proving anything. I thought that the debate, if you look at the bottom of the screen, it says, which has more evidence, right? So I'm listing all these facts and evidence. And notice you've come up with 0. I come up with a long list, and you still have nothing. You still have donut, babe. So while you are telling me to prove things, that debate wasn't that I was supposed to prove there was no God. It was which has more evidence, my long-ass list of facts and evidence, or your zip, your whiteboard that is still blank. Now, why don't you give me fact 1 in support of Christianity?
All right, and we'll call that your first question there of cross-examination.
Yeah, so,
we'll kick it over to PP.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. So I have given argument.
You've given arguments, not evidence. Why is it the religious believers do not understand that arguments are not evidence? Why can't you figure that out? Give me a fact, a thing we can both show to be true that is positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with your position over any other. Give me that.
Up to 1 minute to answer that.
Evidence can be transcendental, meaning it can be observable necessity, so you can actually show something to be logically necessarily the case in reality.
You did not do. You did.
So that would be like Pythagorean.
Minute.
That would be like the Pythagorean theorem. But you rejected transcendental evidence before. But the argument I gave is what's called the argument from sufficient reason. So that for every fact that exists,
failed to provide.
No, I did provide the argument.
You did the question begging.
So I'm supposed to answer. I'm
religion.
pretty sure you asked me a question and I'm supposed to answer it.
Okay.
So for every fact in existence, there must be a sufficient reason for its existence. For every being which exists, every contingent being do not contain the reason for their own existence. So contingent reasons form an infinite regress, which cannot be as established as a fact in itself, since the cause of that fact is outside of the chain of reasons. So there must be a necessary being which is self-caused. The chain of reason.
The circular reasoning fallacy.
It's not circular reasoning.
A circular argument routing back to the assumed conclusion. You're trying to define your God into existence.
Literally argues from the point of necessity that it's basically
right, because there's no necessity for God.
But
God is not necessary. God is imaginary.
Necessity. But that's actually
there is no. Where is there a necessity for God?
I've just explained how that's a necessary being must exist. I've just explained.
You just did a circular argument that I've heard 1,000 times that does not.
If you've heard it 1,000 times, you should understand.
You did the logical fallacy called question begging, which is ubiquitous in all religions, not just Christianity. And it's embarrassing that they all have this thing where they're going to assume that there's a God because there's a God, because they believe there's a God, because there must be a God, so there needs to be a God. So you assume that there's a God, but there's no necessity for that. There isn't. Where is there a necessity for a God?
Must there be a first cause?
What first cause?
So for example, must there be a first reason which explains everything? Or explains or begins the chain of reasons, which can then explain the next thing, which can explain the next thing, which can explain the next thing. If you were to trace it back. So if I was to look at this, let's say this can of Coke, I could give a reason for its existence. Do you believe that there will be a reason that every being which exists has a reason for its existence?
Depends on what you mean by a reason. If it's predetermined purpose, then no.
Not
cause and
predetermined.
Effect. Cause and effect, fine.
Yes, cause and effect will be fine. Okay, so we're going cosmological argument.
So are we talking about a Big Bang, Big Crunch situation, or something like reversing polarity of physics, or some other kind of oscillation?
You can go any physical route
I've talked to a number of cosmologists about this. I don't know why it always comes back to the basis of the universe, because it's completely irrelevant. But the universe is eternal. It was never created. So there is no need for a first cause argument. And if there was, as I've argued many times, everything that was ever attributed to the supernatural has always turned out to be not magic, not supernatural. It was once thought that comets were omens, that volcanoes were gods, tornadoes were gods, all these different things were gods, that epilepsy was demonic possession and all of that. And every time we were not satisfied with those stupid bullshit lies, every time we strived to find the real answer, it turned out to be a revelation of whole new fields of study previously unimagined and vastly more complex than the simplistic notions that we came up in our superstitious primitive state. Likewise, if we were to ever find an explanation for a beginning, if there was a beginning, or an eternity, if there was an eternity, whatever it is for the universe, it will again be a field of study that is vastly more complex than any notion of God, and would render our current beliefs in God to be just as silly as every other study has already rendered God to be.
I mean, I'm happy to accept that our beliefs in God are our knowledge of God versus, for example, God's knowledge of himself would be absolutely, so if a perfect mind knows itself, it would have absolute knowledge of everything. So our knowledge of God would be absolutely terrible. So obviously a field which studied So if a field which studied the mind of God in this respect would be, it would be far superior, but it would dwarf everything we had if it was genuinely gaining greater truth claims. Fair enough. But that doesn't explain, for one, like the eternality of the universe is something that you would have to establish. I mean, that's fine. I mean, it actually does seem that everything, like the eternality of time as a 4-dimensional block, sure, but that, I mean, only in respect to the actual existence of the universe. Like, the problem is that all of these laws, as we perceive them, seem to come into existence at the point of the Big Bang. To say that it's eternal, we'll have no evidence for or against, because we can't actually go prior to the Big Bang. We only get to the point in which there is like the inflationary event, and at that point it all breaks down. And we can look forward on the light cone and we can look back on the light cone, but either way, what we're doing is establishing a relation between cause and effect. And the whole point of the principle of sufficient reason is to say that every and this is why it's superior to a normal cosmological argument, is to say that anything that exists, whether it's eternal or not eternal, must have a reason to exist. Like the eternality of a thing would be determined by it having by it being self-caused. So you'd have to say that the universe is self-caused. Now, do you have evidence to say that the universe is self-caused and therefore God does not exist?
That which was never created, which always existed, which is eternal, that did not have a beginning, did not have a cause to begin. So we know the first law of thermodynamics, that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, and we know that in every model of cosmogony in which there is a singularity, that singularity is itself eternal. I've talked to a number of cosmologists about this, leading cosmologists, and they say that material energy is eternal, and so is universal wave function and all of this, and that there are models in which the universe is just perpetual, in both directions, eternal. So that's the only evidence I have. I don't deal with cosmogony. I don't deal with astrophysics. I teach evolution. That's what I study. I don't actually care how or whether the universe had a beginning, because no matter what that answer is, it doesn't change the fact that we are evolving apes, and that all the scriptures of every religion, including Christianity, are man-made mythology with no truth in them. Not even the existence of God would change either of these facts. If God existed, Christianity would still be a false religion.
The Christian treats every unanswered question as if it moves the debate closer to Christianity. Science doesn't fully explain the universe, so he reaches for a first cause. From there, the first cause becomes a necessary being, and that necessary being somehow becomes the God of the Bible. The chain sounds convincing because each claim sits beside the next one, yet proximity isn't proof. Every link adds a new claim that needs its own evidence. A missing scientific answer gives Christianity nothing for free. It only means the answer is still unknown. Aron keeps separating what the evidence can support from what the believer wants to attach to it. That discipline is what prevents mystery from turning into theology by default. An unexplained universe isn't a deposit on Christianity. The believer still has to prove every step from "we don't know" to "therefore my God." And no philosophical argument can quietly pay that debt for him. Aron's final point lands harder than it may seem. Even if some creator existed, Christianity wouldn't automatically gain a single inch. A generic cause of the universe has no connection to Jesus, Scripture, resurrection, prayer, sin, heaven, hell, or any church doctrine. Those claims still need their own support. That creates a problem for the Christian side of this exchange. The argument keeps getting safer by making God less specific. A personal deity becomes a necessary being. A necessary being becomes the reason anything exists. Eventually, God means little more than whatever sits at the bottom of explanation. The claim becomes harder to attack, yet it also loses nearly everything religion wants from it. There's a cost every time the definition retreats. Suppose the principle of sufficient reason worked exactly as claimed. Suppose reality required some necessary foundation. That would tell us almost nothing about what this foundation thinks, whether it has a mind, whether it cares about humans, whether it issued commandments, or whether it inspired a book. Calling that foundation God adds religious language without adding religious information. This is where philosophical arguments can create an illusion of progress. The speaker reaches a conclusion labeled God, and the familiar word makes it feel as though Christianity has been defended. Yet the argument may have reached only an abstract feature of reality. The label does a huge amount of rhetorical work. It smuggles in personality, purpose, morality, worship, and revelation, even though none of those traits came from the premises. Aron was also right to separate evolution from cosmology. A debate about the origin of the universe cannot erase the evidence showing that humans share common ancestry with other life. Even a creator would not rescue a literal Genesis account from geology, genetics, paleontology, or comparative anatomy. The existence of a deity and the accuracy of a religion are separate claims. That separation is damaging to apologetics because many believers treat God as a package deal. Establish one broad metaphysical idea, and every doctrine attached to it rides along. Yet each attachment creates another factual claim. A creator could exist while Christianity remained false. A creator could exist without souls, miracles, divine commandments, or an afterlife. A creator could even be completely unaware of life on earth. This also explains why the debate kept sliding between different versions of God. The more specific the claim became, the easier it was to test against history, science, and scripture. The more abstract it became, the less it had to do with Christianity. The argument could protect God from criticism only by removing the traits that made the claim religious in the first place. There's a strange trade taking place. Specific gods can explain doctrines, commands, miracles, and sacred texts, but they expose themselves to contradiction and failed claims. Abstract gods avoid many of those problems, but they explain almost nothing about religion. Apologetics often moves back and forth between those two versions, using the abstract one when challenged and the specific one when preaching. That strategy can keep a debate alive for hours, though it never supplies the missing connection. Reaching a necessary cause, even hypothetically, does not reach Christianity. The distance between those claims is where the entire religious case still has to be built. If you enjoyed this debate, leave a like and subscribe for more conversations where arguments get put under the microscope instead of accepted at face value. If you think Aron made the stronger case, or if you believe the Christian answered his objections, tell me why in the comments. Just make your case with evidence. I'd love to read your perspective, and I'll see you in the next video.